This is a real honor and a pleasure because this is the perfect conversation for this morning. We have the perfect panelist for you, and I appreciate everybody coming out. I inadvertently apparently wore the exact right color tie for this or Qatar Airways flight. I love your tie as well, Amos. Thank you. It's fantastic. Amos, for those who don't know, this is arguably one of the most well-connected global energy and energy security experts in the world. He had maybe the most unique job in the previous administration. He was not the energy secretary, but, and you don't have to comment, but to me, you kind of acted as a de facto energy secretary because you were the one traveling around the world doing a lot of the negotiations in really dangerous places where sometimes the people didn't like us very much. So Amos Hochstein is a partner now with TWG Global. It's a massive investment firm making investments around the world. Also, what I love in Formula One and IndyCar, you know, that's my world. And the energy, one of the energy czars of the Biden administration. So Amos, welcome.
Thank you. I don't know if I should thank you or getting me in trouble.
I'm not getting, I said it. But there's no doubt. I mean, listen, not taking anything away from anybody else's role, but just quickly for the audience that may not be 100% familiar, and I don't want to turn my back to you guys. I'm going to do this. And yes, I'm taller than I look on television. That's all I ever get. Nobody ever says handsomer or smarter. They say taller. Give us kind of a 1-minute primer as to what exactly you did for 4 years in the Biden administration, because you were always on a plane.
That's a little bit of a hard question to answer, not one I expected to answer today. But look, I was the president.
And this is being live streamed.
Exactly. So I'm getting myself in trouble here. Look, I was fortunate enough to serve at the White House as President Biden's senior energy advisor. I'd known the president a long time and spent in different roles in prior years. So also spent some time as one of his Middle East negotiators, Lebanon on AI issues, spent a lot of time in the Gulf. Particular concentration in the Middle East because post sort of leading up to October 7 was all the positive, and then after that, those difficult times, we got pulled in more and more into the Middle East. But the role is really sort of a global role that started really around the energy security of the world, around a similar, somewhat an analogous crisis to where we are today, when leading up to Putin's invasion of Ukraine and securing Europe supplies and taking care of sort of the global energy supply system. And with that, the U.S. energy supply system, as you remember, we went to the highest gasoline prices ever, was June 14, 2022 at $5.03. And so at that point, I moved from the international to also leading our domestic energy policy on how do you manage international crises that affect the U.S. economy, and how do we make sure they don't adversely affect the American economy while not affecting how we make foreign policy decisions. So that's a really tricky space to be in, which is the space that we're in right now. And ironically, we're in June. Then it was June of a midterm election year. Now we're in June of a midterm election year. So you have global crisis that is only somewhat in your control, a domestic economy and prices that are always important to support, and a political environment with a clock that is ticking every day. So that Venn diagram that then emerges of how do you make those decisions with the pulls on each of those sides becomes very, very difficult.
You know, I don't spend a whole lot of time in D.C. I live in a state called New Jersey. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's that way or that way. One thing I have learned about being here is that it's always an election year. It's like there's like an industry here built around elections. I never knew that. Please note sarcasm. So let's talk about that clock that's being ticking that you just referenced. 8 million barrels a week from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We're about to go below the fill levels. The SPR was effectively filled in 1983. We're about to go below those levels. What do you make of it? Is there and you'd mentioned to me yesterday that there's some physics issues with flow rates and fill levels. Go into the SPR right now.
Look, I think that the administration believed when they started when the war started, when they entered the war, made the decision to enter the war, that this would be a very short one. So there was no preparation in advance for, okay, we're going to go and do some strikes. There's a possibility that the Straits of Hormuz will be closed. And so let's prepare for that, right? And there are things that you can prepare. We've war gamed this for years. But the belief was based on both not so much faulty intelligence, but faulty reading of intelligence, that it would be very fast and you wouldn't have to do anything. And then immediately it emerged that within a week that regime change was not going to happen in a few days, and this may be longer, and that the straits would actually be closed, which has never happened. So they went to, but they still believed the war. If you remember, the president kept saying 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. So the entire system was based on a solution to the energy markets that was 4 to 6 weeks, which means use all your tools. So they've now deployed the tools. The biggest tool in that kit is the SPR. And so the SPR has been draining at about 8 to 9 million barrels a week, which takes us today, we are finally below the level of when the Biden administration in 2022, we released 180 million barrels. We've now reached that low point and we have now gone below it. The second tool is the draws that are happening from the commercial tanks of both crude and products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, et cetera. But it's gone on for so long that we're now getting to points where, while the Wall Street's not looking at this, anybody following the energy market is looking at, okay, how long can this go on for? These are finite resources. They're not production. It's not like I take oil and I'm going to get more out of the ground. Nothing's coming into the SPR. You're at 340, let's say, this is a very rough number, don't quote me on it, roughly in the 340, maybe a little bit higher, 343 million barrels in the SPR. This is the lowest the SPR has ever been. Since last time it was at this point was when we were going up, right, when we were filling it, as you mentioned. I don't know anyone who believes we can go below 300. I know plenty of people who think we can't get near 300 because physically you will damage the caverns where the oil is stored.
So 300 million barrels is sort of the bottom. It's not zero because we don't know. And to be clear, you're not saying because no one exactly knows how the physics, how the flow rate is going to react, like a straw sort of at the bottom of a glass when there's not a lot of liquid in it.
Well, I don't know. We definitely don't know that point, right? But we do know that before you get to the point that you can't take things out because they start collapsing on you, the caverns will get so much damage you won't be able to refill them.
These are actual caves. These are caves, like
correct.
Actual caves in the ground.
Correct. And at some point, the physics are that when the level gets to a level that is so low that before you can't take anything out anymore, you can't sustain the 8 million barrels a week because it starts slowing the flow. But the same thing is true for the commercial tanks. So when you hear people talk about tank bottoms in a few weeks from now, that's because those are also not filling at the moment, they're only drawing. They also can't go to zero, right? You can't take it to absolute zero. There's a certain layer. Now, we've never gone this low before, but in any event that we're referring to here, you're going to reach sometime in, I think, in early July to mid-July, and with the commercial ones, maybe even at the end of June, a point where you cannot draw anymore. Now, the US is exporting both crude and products to global markets, so we're helping to stabilize global markets in the moment. But you're going to get to a really big decision that has to be made here. If we're still in this situation in 2-3 weeks from now, people in Washington are going to start saying, wait a minute, what happens next week or in 10 days? Am I going to still allow folks to export while prices are going to start rising? Because the market right now has decided I'm not paying attention to anything coming out of Washington. They tell me the war is over, but that's 37 times we've had an announcement of the war is over, and we're still going. And there's no sign that the war is going to end. I mean, we literally just went to battle over the last 72 hours, right? And especially yesterday, we were doing strikes. So not exactly war is over. But Wall Street's basically said, look, we can't listen to this anymore. So we're going to make believe it doesn't exist. And we're going to
make believe.
Make believe it doesn't exist. and we'll trade it like it doesn't exist because we have really good news coming in the U.S. economy for Wall Street we have a massive IPO coming, right, today. We have more IPOs coming. We have massive amounts of AI capex. That's exciting news. And the last thing we want to do is get drawn down by, war and energy and so on. And it's out of our control. But there's a cliff point there, right? At some point you get to, oh crap, tank bottoms. Now what do we do? And then oil prices spike. Now, if we get a deal before that happens, fine. But at some point,
what is that deal? When you say, okay, hold on, because it's important. And Wells Fargo, by the way, put out a note this morning about tank bottoms, $150, whatever. What does a deal look like to you? What deal could we strike? And let me ask this, because my sources, and I've reported on CNBC many times, they're not, and these are good sources, probably some of the same people you talk to, not exactly sure who's running Iran right now.
Look, you got mediators, which used to be Pakistan, but that proved not to be very useful. So now we're on to Qatar is doing a lot of the mediation. And Qatar is self-interested, right? I mean, their LNG is at near zero exports. And that's the majority of the revenue. And so they want the straits open. So they are mediating. Who they're talking to exactly, look, there are different views on who's running the show. Is Mustafa back, the new Ayatollah Supreme Leader? Is he back and now recovering enough that he can run the show? I don't know. But the administration feels that they have a good handle on the people that they're talking to. What is a deal, though? A deal has to, for the purposes of energy, the deal means the U.S. blockade is off, and the Iranian blockade is off. And that there's an agreement that both sides have announced simultaneously, and that 48 hours go by that nobody retracts from it, that the straits are open. And let's be clear, this is not a nuclear deal. This is a MOU, they're calling it, which essentially is open for open and an agreement to talk later over 60 days. So the Iranians get a whole bunch of cash that's stored in banks, their own cash that's frozen in, let's say, about $12 billion. They're able to sell their oil, which probably my math is somewhere in the $160 to $180 million a day of revenue. And so they're making about $1 billion a week. And so under those conditions, the straits open and you have some flow coming through the straits, and it'll build over time. That will signal that we're back to normal. I don't think we'll get
nobody wants to pay Iran the toll.
I wouldn't say that. I disagree with that.
Okay, so, why?
I think a lot of people are willing to pay the toll because...
Well, they're willing because they don't want to get their ship attacked. They don't want to pay the toll.
So I think it's important to differentiate between, and again, let me state, I'm against them having a toll. I think it's wrong. I think we should not be for it. For all the obvious reasons, this is a bad outcome of this ill-advised war. But it's not true to say that nobody wants to pay the toll. I think you have to differentiate between government-owned and private. Government-owned does not want to pay a toll, and they think this is, abhorrent. The private side, ship owners, insurers, and so on, happily they'd pay the toll right now. By the way, some of them are paying the toll, right? About $1 a barrel paid in crypto to the Iranians. There are ship owners that are doing that now. Not a lot, because not a lot's getting through, but they do that in a heartbeat because
they just pass it on.
Yeah, that's not that much.
They don't eat it.
No.
But the national companies will eat it.
No, the consumer eats it. Just like tariffs, the consumer eats it. Taxes, the consumer eats it, right? That's who eats it always, right? No company says, "Oh, I will absorb the cost." That's not how this works. Benevolence, but it's not much. If you then take that $2 million on fee on on a VLCC, right, a very large tanker, that is carrying 2 million barrels. Now translate that ultimately after refining and so on to the consumer, that $2 million is a cent. So it doesn't really matter to them. It's a political issue. It's a national security issue. It's a global architecture issue. And I don't know if the Iranians are going to be allowed to charge or not at the end of this conflict. I do know that they're going to view the strait as something that they are in charge of. It's theirs.
They are not.
They are going to, yes.
Well, we can all say what we want. I'm in charge of the Waldorf Astoria in D.C., but I'm not.
Well, Brian,
It's an international waterway. Oman controls 3 miles off the coast. Iran controls 3 miles off their coast legally, right? And the rest is, which I've been in, by the way, which is international waters. But Iran is trying to assert its dominance over those international waters. What I don't understand, and help me understand, help us understand, and all the people at home watching, why isn't the rest of the world getting more involved? Where's Europe in this?
So one, we can say I agree with all the things that you've said. They shouldn't have control over it. I think international law and maritime, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and all those things say that they don't own it. But possession, right? I mean, the facts on the ground right now is they shouldn't be, and they are. Okay, they are blocking those straits. And by the way, so are we. We're not in control of it. So the straits are closed, despite all the things you've said. So reality is Iran's a horrible regime. It's not like, oh, guys, international law says you can't. And the regime in Iran's like, oh, that's the winning argument. International law, guys.
Why didn't we think of this? Shit, you got us on that one. You're right.
Damn.
Page
all right,
417 of the Admiralty Law Code. Yeah,
right, exactly.
The class I got an A in law school, by the way, was Admiralty Law.
So, we're supporting Hezbollah, the Shia militia groups, the Houthis, but international law says I can't control the straits. Possession. They will seek to control it in different ways. It doesn't mean that they charge a toll, but they may. I have no idea. It depends on how this conflict ends.
Well, if they can, why wouldn't they? You ever been? Anybody here ever been on the New Jersey Turnpike? You ever been on the New Jersey? A lot of people don't know this. New Jersey Turnpike, when it was built, they charged a toll. They still do, but they did. And they said once the New Jersey Turnpike is paid off, the toll will go away.
Yeah.
Right? And then the state of New Jersey realized, oh my God, we're making a lot of money here. They have no economic incentive to get rid of the toll on the turnpike despite years of promises. Iran doesn't have an economic incentive to get rid of the toll. If they can charge it and threaten to hit somebody with an RPG or a mine from World War I, they're going to do it. So what's the economic incentive that they might have
it's more than
to end the war?
So look, we're at a standoff here where they are in economics dire straits, and the world economy is taking a hit over the straits being closed. And now both sides for the last several weeks have been saying, okay, I think the other side's going to blink first. And the Iranians are in a tough spot. I have not known the Iranians historically to concede on at the negotiating table because of economics what they were not willing to concede on the battlefield. So the United States thought it would face the pressure, but the reality is that both sides got this wrong. The Iranians they're feeling pressure, but they're not likely to concede as a result of economic pressure alone. And the Iranians got it wrong because Wall Street basically says, I want the war to be over, and Wall Street is the reason the war is not over. Oil trading at 90, which, by the way, Brent oil trading at night, which is the international benchmark, is just a number on a screen on a Bloomberg terminal or on CNBC ticker at the bottom. You can't actually buy a barrel of Brent for $90 right now. It costs significantly more, which is why we have demand destruction happening in different countries. So the Iranians got it wrong because there's no real pressure on the administration to end this at the moment, because gasoline prices had hit $4.50. They're now down to $4.15 because oil is lower because people think the war is about to end. And they will continue to think it's about to end until the tank bottoms. And Wells Fargo is going to say $150 when that happens. But these things are pretending that one day it's 90 and the next day it's 150. It doesn't work that way. Or another bank had said 200. I don't believe there's such a thing as 200, because as prices go up, right, when it gets to $5 a gallon of gasoline, or my experience is $4.50, behavior starts to change. Household decide, I'm going to take the train. I'll work from home. I will consolidate my drive of picking up the kids and going to the store instead of doing 2 trips. At $5, that extends further. At $120 a barrel, we're at $5 a gallon, and you're going to see demand destruction even in the United States. But long before that, you'll see demand destruction that you've already seen in low-income countries. Then it goes to middle-income countries, right? So Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam have already put in measures of work from home, cut down on domestic flights to maintain jet fuel, demand international carriers bring their own fuel when they land, so fly a bigger plane that has the fuel to do a round trip so that they don't fill in their country. That's already happened. That's in existence. But markets don't care about low-income countries, and they barely care about middle-income countries. Now, if it happens to Japan or Korea, then markets start caring. But that we're not there yet at this point.
Well, I think people are asking why we're not there yet. I think if you read the reports from 3 months ago, many of them would have suggested that by June, what's today's date? The 10th or 11th or something like this. We all travel way too much. You asked me earlier, what day is it? It was Wednesday. I'm the same way. A lot of reports would have said by June 10th, we would have been in much more dire straits than we are now.
I think the people who follow the SPR and the tanks and so on have all said, and I have end of June to mid-July, that's been the consistency of what we've been saying, because you do the math. Why are prices lower? Why are they not hitting those prices? Because we're going gangbusters on a finite buffer, right? So we have a buffer. The market's actually working exactly as it was designed to work post the 1970s crisis. We've created an SPR in the United States. We created an SPR in Japan. China has an SPR. And then we have the commercial inventories. So they can supply the market when there is a shortage, right? A hurricane comes, we shut down everything in the Gulf of Mexico, all the production. We shut down the refineries for, let's say, 5 to 7 days out of precaution. The economy uses the inventories instead, and then we go back to production and we refill the inventories. Except now it wasn't designed to go this long, so you have a few more weeks. So we're in pretend land in the energy markets as though production has increased. Let me tell you something. I heard some of the interviews yesterday.
Did you see my interview with the current Secretary of Energy where he said that ship traffic was rising, and that interview, when the headlines hit, moved the markets?
Right. So if I'm in the markets, don't you ask the question, it's rising from 2 to 3? From 2 to 6?
It's higher than that. It's higher than that.
But I'll tell you what it is.
It's higher than that.
It's about, on the escorted traffic, it's somewhere in the 6 to 10 per 24 hours. Remember, we were 165 in either direction before the war.
Do you believe all those numbers, though? Because, again, people I'm talking to say, well, some people pay the toll, they don't want anybody to know. Some people are escorted by the U.S., they don't want anybody to know. Some people turning off their transponders, or some combination of all the above. And the numbers right now are really, really mushy.
The numbers are for sure mushy, if that's the technical term that we're using.
I think it is now, yeah.
Okay,
We just made that up.
It is. I think we're at a place where we're about somewhere in the 6-8 ships by escort of the U.S. military, which is why the helicopter was down, because they're shooting at this escort operation. So sail at your own risk. Then you have a number of Iranian ships that are going through, and then you have some of the paying the tolls. But here's the key. Not every ship is the same. So some ships, right, a VLCC carries 2 million. There are some ships that only carry 500,000. The ones that are turning their transponders off and are evading the Iranians and the Americans tend to be smaller. So even if the number of ships is less important than the number of volume.
Barrels.
So the Iranians are getting a bunch of tankers that are going through hugging the coast, and they're very small. So how much does all this matter? But here's the key. I heard yesterday people talk about, like the previous administration and so on, and I'm happy that we're still very interesting to people. But we ended the administration with 13.5 million barrels a day of production. So they're breaking all the records at the end of the Biden administration. Despite all the greenest administration, which I think we were also at 13.5 million barrels a day of production. Today we're at 13.7. So within this entire period of time of oil prices going to 110 and then back down to 93 to 86, back to 95, we've had essentially no increase in production. This is really important, because as you go to the next level of how this ends and what happens when the tank bottoms, are we going to have an increase in production? No, because every day that we jawbone the market into the war is over in a day or two, and therefore don't worry about it. Well, the producer says, I'm not sinking $1 billion into the ground to increase production. If the war is going to be over, this $95 I'm never going to benefit from with my new barrels, and it'll drop to 70. So actually, we have frozen. This war has frozen increase of production in the United States and around the world.
Is 85, and I know we're running out of time, so it's kind of rapid fire. Is 85 to $100 a barrel kind of a weird spot? Because, to your point, it's not high enough to really crush demand for the American driver, right? Because all the reasons you gave earlier, but it's also not low enough where you get this economic boom, but it's not enough money where the Chevrons and Exxons and Conocos and everybody else, Diamondbacks and whatever the world, are going to start reinvesting. Because if they don't know if it's going to last, to your point, why would they invest the capital?
And that's why the point is never about what's the price right now. We're in an environment where the price doesn't matter. What matters is the trajectory. Is this a price that's going to be here for a while? Or is it going to go way higher because we're not going to reach a deal? Or is it going to go way lower because we're not? So I can live with any price environment as an energy company or as an energy investor, or as any part of the energy system. What I can't live so comfortably with is the volatility and the uncertainty. And so we have these announcements of a deal coming, but then they don't happen, and then I don't know how I'm supposed to plan for this.
Why don't you get more credit for ending with 13.5 million barrels a day? I understand you guys did a lot to build out wind, you did a lot to build out solar, did a lot to build out battery storage. By the way, and we need those things to continue to grow because we're going to need all molecules and electrons. I think you would agree with that clearly. Nuclear as well. But why don't you get more credit on the oil side? You don't have to litigate the past, I get it, but you guys get hammered for this.
I think, as you heard yesterday, where I disagree, I think people didn't like the rhetoric that we said, that we wanted to have a energy transition towards a cleaner energy existence, right? Market.
Well, phasing out was not the best word.
But if you look at the record of what we did, and ignore the politics, because America has way too much politics in energy policy. Climate is real. The risk is real. We need to do things towards it. We should support offshore wind, onshore wind, renewables, nuclear, and electric vehicles. But we also have to, even if you're on the climate side of wanting to do this as fast as possible, you have to live in the real world. And the real world says we cannot move away from fossil fuels overnight. It's going to be a multi-decade process. And the national security of the United States depends on it. The economic security of the United States depends on it. And as we're seeing in this crisis, we have to have not all of the above, because I still don't think we need coal, and I think that's too dangerous and damaging. But the idea is that we have to have as much as possible of the sources to focus on supporting an AI boom in power, and to support our national security in case of shortages.
Would you agree? I know we're out of time, but would you agree with this, that some people argue there is no energy, quote, transition, there's energy addition, because the only type of energy we've used less of ever in the history of humanity is whales. And they're very happy about that, by the way. In fact, one was just off the New Jersey coast, like 100 feet, a giant whale yesterday. Pretty amazing photograph if you haven't seen it. But the world has never used more solar. The world has never used more wind. The world has never used more nuclear. And you can hate it, but the world has never used more coal.
Yes, and that's terrible. And I think part of that is because the people on the extremist side, on the climate side, disregard reality that we still need to power our systems. And we don't use oil for power, by the way. We use it for everything else. But I do disagree that we're not in energy transition. And yes, the pie keeps growing, so the percentage of renewables stays at 80%, despite the fact that we grow so much. I disagree because look at what's happening in China. A third of the barrel is essentially transportation. China is moving towards almost entirely an EV-based transportation system. That is going to have an impact. And by the way, what's balancing part of that we didn't talk about?
That's probably why oil is not higher, because China's demand, JP Morgan just said the demand destruction in China might be 4 million barrels a day.
Well, it is, but it's not destruction. They're importing 4.5 to 5 million barrels less per day than they were before the war started, but they also have the largest reserve.
1.3 billion by some, whatever the number is.
So a lot.
Is that a technical term?
It's
a lot.
It's with mushy.
Okay.
And or squishy, whatever you called it. So look, I think we are in a transition, except that I think people need to understand, one, yes, we are in transition, and B, it's going to be a slow and long one because our demand pull keeps rising. 5 years ago, nobody thought, or 3 years ago, nobody thought that we would have a need to grow our electricity generation by dramatic levels because of the AI boom. Everything we do in life, any new innovation requires more power, more energy. Yeah. Everything, every single new innovation in the health system, all the way to our transportation and our computing. And so we're going to need more power and more energy. And that's why I don't understand the administration, why they're blocking offshore wind, why they're blocking solar and wind. Yes, do the gas, do the oil, but also do all.
We're going to need it all. We're going to need it all.
We're going to need it all.
We're going to need it all. I know we're out of time, but can you do that in a Scottish accent like Star Trek? We're going to need more power because we are. By the way, if you look at the next generation of AI chips, they're going to demand way more power than the current generation, of which we're doing. I could talk for another hour with you, but the clock says -3, which means I've gone over by 3 minutes.
You're getting docked.
I'm going to get my pay dock, which good. My fee for being here is 0. So I will
just keep going till -13, see what happens.
So yeah, 3%. What, anybody here a math whiz? 3% of 0. What's the number on that? Exactly. So it was an honor and a privilege. Let's give a big hand for Amos Hochstein, please. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of your conference. Take care.